Mr. Speaker, I urge all MPs today to do what they believe to be right for their constituents, their jobs, their living standards and their communities, and support this proposal today that we may debate the bill tomorrow and prevent a no-deal Brexit with all the damage this would do to our community and our society.
The Leader of the House, Mr. Jacob Rhys Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to be speaking in this debate, brought to us by the Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for Dorset West, and to follow, of course, the Leader of Her Majesty's opposition. The Prime Minister has said, including in his statement earlier, this government is absolutely committed to delivering Brexit on the 31st of October. We must deliver the largest democratic mandate in the nation's history. Delivering the referendum result requires this House to respect the voice of the people as expressed in that historic vote. And so far, the House has failed to do so. And now, instead of backing the Prime Minister and giving him the best possible chance of securing a deal before the UK leaves the European Union on the 31st of October, we find ourselves debating a proposition that seeks to confound the referendum result again. Mr. Speaker, I wish to be clear. What is proposed today is constitutionally irregular, and I will of course give that.
I'm grateful for him giving way. Could he remind the House how many times did he vote against the deal?
The deal is dreadful. It's why the Prime Minister is getting a better one, if only the House would let him. But this is irregular, both in terms of the approach to allowing SO24s on substantive motions and in terms of the subversion of Parliament's proper role in scrutinising and the executive in initiating. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm enormously grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for allowing me to intervene upon him. He will know the importance of the Good Friday Agreement to the people of Northern Ireland. And he will also know, as a unionist, that without a deal there will be an inevitable hardening of the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which will incentivise Sinn Féin to agitate for a border poll, to take Northern Ireland out of the United Kingdom and into the Republic of Ireland, into United Ireland. How on earth could the Right Honourable Gentleman defend the indefensible?
Because, Mr. Speaker, I simply disagree with the Honourable Lady that there would have to be a political desire to impose a hard border, and neither the United Kingdom nor the Government of the Republic of Ireland has such a desire. Of course I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I appreciate that. I have a certain fondness for him from our time on the R&R committee some years ago. I'll tell the Right Honourable Gentleman what is constitutionally irregular, and that is shutting down Parliament, shutting down debate, and shutting down the ability of MPs to hold this government to account. So can the Right Honourable Gentleman tell me when it was that he became aware of the Prime Minister's plan to shut down Parliament in order to force through a no-deal Brexit? Because papers in the Court of Session today suggest it was the Prime Minister's plan on the 16th of August.
Mr. Speaker, as Parliament is not being shut down, cannot be shut down, I could not be aware of plans to do something that is not happening. So the Honourable Gentleman should be wrong. I'll give way to my Honourable friend.
My Right Honourable friend will be aware that the majority of members, colleagues, voting against the government tonight voted to trigger Article 50, which said that we would leave the EU with or without a deal. It was very simple, very clear. Which bit does he think they now don't understand?
Speaker, I think they don't like losing referendums and they never accepted it. But I must come back to the constitutional issue, because this motion risks subverting Parliament's proper role in scrutinising and the executive in initiating. And, Mr. Speaker, you particularly have a grave responsibility, of which I know you are well aware, to uphold the norms and conventions that underpin our Constitution. But we all have a role to play, and it does considerable damage when some of us choose to subvert rather than reinforce, to hinder rather than to polish our Constitution. I give way to
I thank the Leader of the House for giving way, and he's talking about the alleged subversion of democracy. I'm going to ask it very, very clearly. You seem to not answer the Honourable Gentleman along the way. On what date did he first become aware of the plan to prorogue Parliament? And secondly, could he tell us whether any officials from his office, 10 Downing Street, others, whether political advisers or civil servants, have been conducting communications away from normal channels in such a way that would not comply with the terms of candour and disclosure necessary for the court proceedings which are currently taking place.
If people were carrying out discussions without candour, I wouldn't know about them, so I therefore wouldn't be able to tell the honourable gentleman if they'd happened or not. But I carry out all my discussions with candour, and if anybody is interested, the Privy Council's function is reported in the court sector. I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
My right honourable friend is being extremely generous, and I'm grateful to him for giving way. If we were to leave the EU on a no-deal basis, effectively that would mean that we would operate on WTO rules. Given that the EU currently operates with a number of countries on WTO rules, including the US, China, Russia, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand and many other countries, would my right honourable friend agree with me that we should not be as fearful to trade on WTO rules outside the EU, given that we are already trading on WTO rules in the EU?
My right honourable friend makes a brilliant and incisive point, and he is absolutely right. So we need to examine what is being put forward to the House and to consider this very concerning and odd aspect that it is actually being permitted in the first place. Let us look, Mr. Speaker, at SO24 and the approach we are taking. As you know, I take an interest in the rules of the House. Oh, of course, I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I knew he would. He's always behaved perfect courtesy. Very grateful. And I was just astonished to hear him agree that we'd be perfectly all right proceeding on WTO rules. Does he accept that WTO rules will require the European Union to apply tariffs against our agriculture, fisheries and much of our manufacturing in line with the tariffs they impose against other third-party countries? And WTO rules will require us to have a closed border in Ireland to enforce those restrictions. You can't have it one way or another. You either obey the WTO rules or you ignore those as well and pretend there's some fat never land you're going into. But you can't simply accept calmly the argument that WTO rules will do no damage to our economy.
Well, I must confess, Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised by my right honourable learned friend's astonishment, because I've been making the case for WTO rules for some time. It has been a very sensible way to proceed and will allow us to carry on trading as we do with many other countries. But my right honourable learned friend also wished to intervene.
Well, I'm most grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He says that the House's role is one of scrutiny, and I agree. And yet does he not see that there is an incompatibility between that scrutiny and in fact taking steps through prorogation to deprive us of the effective opportunity of carrying it out? And when considering that, he may also agree with me that so much in this House depends on trust. How can we have trust when there have already been a number of examples of the government making inaccurate statements, such as, for example, that the papers prepared for its briefing in Yellowhammer were the product of a previous administration when they were not, and secondly, and perhaps most pertinently, over prorogation, when it appears that the facts as stated by the government as to the reasons of prorogation have turned out to be entirely inaccurate, now causing the government considerable difficulties over its duty of candour in litigation. Now, when you aggregate all that together, perhaps my right honourable friend might begin to understand why many of us have finally decided that this House must take action.
My right honourable friend is very learned, but his learning doesn't always lead him in the right direction. The prorogation is completely routine. The opposition front bench, when I was first and indeed last at this dispatch box, was asking for the session to be brought to an end. We were merely being our obliging selves, Mr. Speaker, in leading forth to a new keyed speech in the general course of events. In due course, because we always like to hear from the honourable gentleman, the member for the Rhondda, who informs and educates us when he speaks. But we are going to have to wait, Mr. Speaker, for this informing and educating. We are all bating our breath for it, but I like to keep people on tenterhooks for the time being, because I wish to talk about Erskine May, our old friend. And this sets out, Mr. Speaker, your role. And the chief characteristic attached to the office of Speaker in the House of Commons are authority and impartiality. And it would be disorderly, wrong, and not my intention to question your impartiality. But, like the umpires at Edgbaston, who saw 8 of their decisions sent for review and overturned, accepting somebody's impartiality is not the same as accepting their infallibility. And it is worth noting what a wise and scholarly speaker once said. Indeed, this wise and scholarly speaker said as recently as last year that a debate held under Standing Order number 24 could only be held on a substantive and amendable motion if the standing order is itself amended. In April 2008, in the light of 2 emergency debates on the UK's decision to take military action in Syria, you yourself said, "It is perfectly open to the House to amend Standing Order number 24, of which there is some uncertainty and often incomprehension. It could be amended to allow for the tabling of substantive motions in circumstances of emergency, which could also be amendable and on which the House could vote. If there are any members who are interested in that line of inquiry, they could usefully raise it with the chair of the Procedure Committee. As far as I am aware, no change has been made to Standing Order 24, yet the decision has changed. Various et mutabilis semper dicta. But now I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
Well, the Leader of the House said earlier that Parliament isn't being suspended. But actually, in this case, it is. He knows perfectly well that select committees will not be able to sit. There will be absolutely no proceedings of Parliament, as according to the Bill of Rights. There will be no proceedings of Parliament whilst Parliament is prorogued. I want Parliament to prorogue, but I only want it to prorogue for 4 or 5 days so that we can do our job of scrutinising the government through proceedings in Parliament. That's the point. We want a Queen's speech, but we want to be able to come back and do our job.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman knows the procedures of this House only too well. He knows that we were about to go, in some cases, to the seaside for party conferences, in the case of my party, to a major city centre. And that is why we are taking 4 or 5 days of parliamentary time and simply going over the normal recess. That is not in any sense an abuse, and I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Leader for giving way. Could he go back to his point about Standing Order 24? I mean, it does seem to me he's absolutely quite correct, and the Speaker in his previous statement was correct, that this could not be on a substantive motion. Now, if this motion is carried tonight, which appears to be a substantive motion, it seems to me the government would have every right to declare it ultra vires and ignore it.
Order. I know that the honourable gentleman won't presume to argue with the judgment of the chair, entitled as he is to the possession and expression of his opinion. And what I would say to the honourable gentleman, in order to help him and to assist the Leader of the House, is this. If, in the judgment of the chair, a motion under Standing Order number 24 is expressed in neutral terms, it will not be open to amendment, if it is judged to be expressed in neutral terms. The reality of the matter is there have been previous occasions upon which there have been Standing Order number 24 motion debates which have contained what I would prefer to call evaluative motions, notably, with which I feel sure the Leader is familiar, on the 18th of March 2013 and on the 11th of December 2018. It is in conformity with that practice that I have operated. I have taken advice of a professional kind, and I am entirely satisfied that the judgment that I have made is consistent with that advice. My attitude is simply to seek to facilitate the House. The Leader rightly referred to my responsibility, which was grave and solemn. I completely accept that, as well as I accept his right to his own view about my judgment in this matter. I have sought to exercise my judgment in discharging my responsibility to facilitate the House of Commons, to facilitate the legislature. I have done it, I am doing it, and I will do it to the best of my ability, without fear or favour, to coin a phrase, come what may, do or die.
I'm grateful, as always, Mr. Speaker, for your contribution to the debate, and it is always very useful that your words should be referred to and reminded to the House, where it was suggested by you that this matter should be referred to the Procedure Committee and the motion amended, which it hasn't been. There is so much to say and so little time, others will want to speak. This motion, in a number of ways, is extraordinary. I will, of course, give way to the Honourable Learned Lady.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I wonder if I might go back to the matter raised by the Right Honourable Learned Member for Beaconsfield. It was revealed in court this morning in a case raised in my name and that of 70 other members of this House that on the 16th of August, the Prime Minister agreed to a suggestion that Parliament should be prorogued on the 9th of September. But on the 25th of August, a number 10 spokesperson said The claim that the government is considering proroguing Parliament in September in order to stop MPs debating Brexit is entirely false. Does the right honourable gentleman accept that the spokesperson misled MPs and the public on the 25th of August?
I'm sorry to say, Mr. Speaker, that the most obvious understanding of the ordinary use of the English language, which normally the Honourable Lady is pretty good at, makes it quite clear that the two statements are entirely compatible. The prorogation is the normal prorogation to have a new session. It is not to stop debate on matters related to the European Union. And it is, of course, a pleasure to give way to the Honourable Gentleman, the member for the Hillingham and Yar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Now, the Right Honourable Gentleman spoke earlier about candour, and the need for candour means that he has to accept that when it comes to WTO, all countries bar about 3 in the world are in regional trade associations. And the 3 that aren't are roughly South Sudan, Somalia and East Timor, probably soon joined if a hard Brexit comes by the UK. But given that these countries, every other bar 3, are in regional trade associations, that means they don't exclusively trade at WTO. So the place that he talks about, when he talks about WTO, he's taking the UK to a place of exclusively trading on WTO, which is moving out of free trade with 500 million people to make trade more expensive with 500 million people. That's his policy. Now, the other question, did you know about prorogation on the 16th of August?
16th of August, I was at Lord's watching a game of cricket, unless it was one of the days when it rained. But on the WTO issue, our trade with the United States on WTO terms, and I know the Honourable Gentleman is an expert in these matters, has grown faster since the creation of the single market than our trade with the European Union. But I understand my right honourable friend wishes to intervene.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. I understand his views and his concerns about the supposed constitutional irregularity of these proceedings, and no doubt in the future all these things can be debated. Will he accept that we stand as a nation at present at a moment which will have a profound effect on the welfare of our people, and that the sovereign parliament of this country clearly deserves an opportunity to be able to decide whether it will accept a policy of no-deal exit or not, and that overwhelmingly matters more than whether the Standing Order 24B clause with where in it, misdrafted in all probability by the then Leader of the House, has a particular meaning or does not have a particular meaning.
There is, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to say, stunning arrogance to that view. And it fails to understand where sovereignty comes from. So I do indeed dare to say this, and I say that to the right honourable gentleman.
Order. I recognise that there are strongly held views on both sides of the House on all aspects of this matter, but the Leader of the House must be heard. The Leader.
Mr. Speaker, sovereignty in this House comes from the British people, and the idea that we can overrule 17.4 million people is preposterous, and the idea that our rules do not exist to protect the people from arrogant power grabs is mistaken. Those rules are there for the protection of the people. I have given way so many times and to many distinguished members, and it is now time to come on to this motion which is extraordinary and unprecedented. Parliament is attempting to set aside Standing Order number 14 to give precedence to the EU Withdrawal number 6 bill. This motion goes further and seeks to claim an unknown and unquantified number of subsequent days for consideration of Lord's amendments and messages. It is a fundamental principle that government is able to transact its business in this House, a principle this House has long accepted in Standing Order number 14. This motion also sets aside in a new parliamentary session the standing orders that apply in relation to the presentation of private members' bills. The motion would allow a designated member, few of the Illuminati who are taking the powers to themselves, to give notice of presentation of this bill on the first day of the new session, and then provide time for debate on this bill on the second day of the new session, interrupting the Queen's speech. There is an established process for the House debating the Queen's speech, a process that this bill would undermine. While the Outlaws Bill has its first reading just before the start of the Queen's speech debate, this bill is only read a first time as a formality and not debated. To interrupt the Queen's speech to debate a backbench bill, such as the one proposed in this motion, would be unprecedented. The government has an obligation to bring forward its business, and the Queen's speech and the debate that follows is one of the great set pieces of the parliamentary calendar, where the government is rightly scrutinised and held to account, and this is being interrupted, and I give way to the very patient honourable gentleman.
To the right honourable gentleman for giving way, but I want to come back to a point made by the honourable gentleman from Wellingborough. The right honourable gentleman said quite a lot as a Brexiteer that we would be taking back control of our laws. So can he be crystal clear at the dispatch box tonight that if the bill passes in this House and passes another way, the government will not stop that getting royal assent if we're taking back control of our laws?
The law will be followed. This country is a country that follows the rule of law, and this government assiduously follows constitutional conventions, unlike some other members of this House. But I understand the honourable gentleman from Stone wishes to intervene.
In what could only be described as a breathtaking intervention by the member for West Dorset just now, and in support of my right honourable friend's assertion that it was weighed with great arrogance, would my right honourable friend be good enough to confirm that, in fact, the referendum bill as enacted was a sovereign act of Parliament which deliberately gave the right to the British people and not to the British Parliament to make the decision on the question of remain or leave?
The honourable gentleman is, of course, right, and we report to the British people anyway. They are our bosses, and the honourable lady has been so patient.
I'd like to thank him for giving way. Back to the bigger picture. The Prime Minister made it very clear in a speech last night and in a statement today that his preferred outcome is to leave with a deal. Can the Leader of the House confirm that that is also his preferred outcome, and that if a deal is agreed at the next European Council, sufficient time will be made in this chamber to make sure that we've legislated for that deal?
The honourable lady is absolutely right, and I can say both personally and as bound by collective responsibility that I am in favour of a deal. We must allow other people to speak. I see that timed winged chariot is speeding away, and therefore I must get on to the separation of powers. Well, if the honourable gentleman wants me to carry on all night, I'll do my best. But the debate we are having today goes to the heart of our Constitution and the roles of the Executive and Parliament. These are matters of careful balance. It is for government, by virtue of its ability to command the confidence of this House, to exercise executive power. This includes the order of business and bringing forward legislation. It is for Parliament to scrutinise, to amend, to reject or to approve. Indeed, the scrutiny of the executive is one of the core functions of Parliament. These complementary and distinctive roles are essential to the functioning of the Constitution. Ministers are, of course, accountable to Parliament for their decisions and actions, and Parliament can make clear its views. It is not, however, for Parliament to undertake the role and functions of the executive. Constitutional convention is that executive power is exercised by Her Majesty's government, which has a democratic mandate to govern. That mandate is derived from the British people and represented through this House. And, Mr. Speaker, when we look at this Constitution, we are protected by our rules and by our orders and by our conventions. We will remember from a man from all seasons that it is those rules, those laws, those conventions that protect us from the winds of tyranny. And if we take away those protections, as the right honourable gentleman proposes, we lose our protections. And it is therefore on the basis of this convention that the government, not Parliament, is responsible for negotiations with the European Union. Parliament as a whole cannot negotiate for the UK. This is the role of the government in exercising executive power to give effect to the will of the nation. These roles are fundamental and underpin the country's uncodified constitution. The government draws power from Parliament. The government draws power from Parliament, but the government may at any time be removed by the tried and tested motion of a confidence debate. And the fact that Parliament has not been willing to go down this route, the fact that the opposition are afraid of this route, the fact that the opposition run away from the confidence vote route is because they do not dare have the leader of the opposition at head of the government. They are frightened. The honourable lady says there is time. Let me say as Leader of the House that if they want a motion of confidence, this government will always make time for it and obey the Constitutional Convention. But they are afraid. They are white with fear because they don't want the right honourable gentleman to be in 10 Downing Street. And I will now give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Will he agree with me that if this House succeeds in stripping our Prime Minister of the key negotiating card of a no deal, the likelihood of that outcome will be that much accentuated?
Thank you. Yes, it makes the negotiations much harder. My honourable friend is right, absolutely right. But now let us turn to the substance of what we are debating. Ostensibly, the purpose of the bill is to stop no deal. But the government wants a deal. We are willing to sit down with the Commission and EU member states to talk about what needs to be done and to achieve a deal. This must involve the excision of the anti-democratic backstop. The government has also been clear that we must respect the referendum result, and the UK will be leaving the EU on the 31st of October, whatever the circumstances, unless and until the EU agrees to negotiate. We will be leaving with no deal on the 31st of October. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has made a statement earlier today in which he informed the House of all that is being done to ensure we are ready for all eventualities. The good Boy Scouts that we are prepared, and I will definitely give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Does he not realise that in proroguing Parliament for 5 weeks, which is the longest prorogation right in the middle of a political crisis that there has been since 1945, his government and he have deliberately prevented scrutiny that would be legitimate in this House, hence the situation we find ourselves in now? And will he, when he gets back up at that dispatch box, confirm that if this bill is passed through this House and passes the other place, he will speed the royal assent and his government will not act against the law?
I don't wish to be pedantic, Mr. Speaker, but it's one of the constitutional niceties that it's Her Majesty's government, it's not mine, and it is led by my right honourable friend, the member for Uxbridge. But the important issue here is that prorogation is a routine start for a new session. We are losing a similar number of days that we would lose for a normal prorogation. I will give way to the... I'm afraid the Honourable Lady, I will give way to her, but she is trumped momentarily by the Chairman of the Brexit Select Committee.
Extremely grateful to the Leader of the House for giving way. Now that the Speaker has made it clear that there is nothing irregular at all about his acceptance of this motion, and given that I presume the Leader of the House accepts that the House is in charge of its own procedures, how can there be anything constitutionally irregular if the House chooses to pass this motion and then the bill tomorrow, in the House choosing to instruct the government that there is an outcome to the Brexit negotiations that the House is not prepared to accept, which is leaving without a deal on the 31st of October?
The honourable gentleman conflates irregular and proper. This is unquestionably irregular, even though it is not improper. And the two are different concepts, which the right honourable gentleman, I'm sure, fully understands. It is, of course, for this House to regulate its own proceedings, but a fundamental principle of our Constitution is that the government commands the confidence of this House. If this from a sedentary position, an honourable gentleman says it doesn't. Now that is the lock that would undo this constitutional conundrum, because the House dare not say it has no confidence in the government. It is frightened of that, and therefore it tries to take away confidence on specifics whilst maintaining confidence in the generality. That is not a proper constitutional position to be in. And very difficult to choose who to give way to, but I promise the Honourable Lady.
He has referred many times in his speech to the accountability, and within that vein of accountability, can I ask him a simple question? On what date did he become aware of the Prime Minister's intention to prorogue Parliament?
Yes, I've been asked that question, and I understand there are papers in court, and I don't know when I was told that this was happening, though I did have to get I had to get a flight. I had to get a flight up to Aberdeen for a meeting of the Privy Council, but without consulting my diary and my telephone records, I would not wish to say something that was inaccurate. But let us get back to what is happening here. I was saying that we are the good Boy Scouts. We are well prepared for leaving with or without a deal, and it is absurd for MPs to attempt to bind the hands of the Prime Minister as he seeks to agree a deal they can support ahead of the European Council. The European Union withdrawal bill makes it harder to deliver the two things the public wants from Brexit. Certainty is one of them, and for it to be delivered. The bill does not do this. It is nothing but legislative legerdemain and a vehicle for extension after extension. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady, who's been very patient.
I thank my right
right honourable friend for giving way. My constituents in Sleaford and North Hykeham voted overwhelmingly to leave and are very concerned about the bill proposed for tomorrow that they can see would block Brexit. Could my right honourable friend confirm my understanding that if this bill were to pass, the options available would be to the EU, and they would be to, 1, agree a largely pointless 3-month extension, which would almost certainly be repeated, 2, offer a deal of their choice, not negotiated by our government, or no deal. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that that is not taking back control for this Parliament or for this government, but ceding it entirely to Brussels?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, because what is happening is a deliberate attempt to sow the seed for an extension long enough for a second referendum, or simply to stop us leaving at all. It is about denying Brexit, and the fact that the bill mandates updates on negotiations and motions on those updates on a rolling 28-day basis clearly envisages either a lengthy extension or possibly indefinite vassalage. And these seeds could grow into legislation to be introduced on the 15th of January, the 12th of February, and then every 28 days thereafter to command the government to take specific actions. The aim is to create a marionette government in which there is only nominal confidence, and it defies the convention in what we are doing today, a convention of great importance, that emergency legislation is only passed when there is a consensus. Governments less benign than this one in future may learn from this process and ram through any legislation they feel like. Without consensus, emergency legislation is something those on the opposition benches should be very careful about, for they may find they are at the wrong end of it in future. And we should be trying to help the Prime Minister in his chance to negotiate, not trying to bind him hand and foot. Not only do we want to be the vassal state of the European Union, we wish to send the Prime Minister bound hand and foot to go and negotiate with them. Mr. Speaker, you will be glad to know, Mr. Speaker, that I am drawing gently to a close, and therefore I fear the time for interventions, except from my very old friend, the Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, the Chairman of the very distinguished committee that she's Chairman of.
Send him a note. Mr. Speaker, for once the right honourable gentleman has made an error and he's over-promoted me, but I thank him for his distinctive comments. There's a serious point here. We are a representative democracy, not a direct democracy. And I take that judgment seriously, as I know do colleagues across the House. The government does not have a majority. We are in uncharted constitutional territory. So it is absolutely right and proper that we exercise our judgment in the interests of the country to avoid, at the very least, a no-deal Brexit. So for all of the talk from the honourable member, right honourable member, we must exercise that judgment. That is what we're doing. It is entirely responsible.
I'm afraid I disagree with the Honourable Lady, and I must confess I'm astonished that she's not a Right Honourable. Something must have gone wrong with the Privy Council, of which I'm now Lord President, for this not to be the case. Honourable Member from Rhondda feels he has also not been justly promoted. I am sorry.
But I don't think the Leader of the House was planning to invite the Honourable Lady to join him in Balmoral, as far as I'm aware. So I'm not sure it makes a great deal of difference in the immediate circumstance. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I'm afraid the Honourable Lady is wrong, because there is a routine constitutional procedure to deal with that, and that is the vote of confidence. And yes, we are a representative body, but where does our sovereignty come from? And here I'm in agreement with the Scots. Sovereignty comes from the people to Parliament. We hold it in trust for them, and they gave us an instruction. And if we follow this route, we are left with but 3 options. We then have to accept the deal with its anti-democratic backstop. We have to keep on extending, because Parliament would never accept that we are ready to leave, or we could simply revoke and tell 17.4 million people that they were wrong. The approach taken today is the most unconstitutional use of this House since the days of Charles Stuart Parnell, when he tried to bung up Parliament. Usurping the executive's right is unconstitutional. The abuse of emergency debates to do so is unconstitutional, and the bill itself is yet more unconstitutional. A.V. Dicey said all conventions have one ultimate object: to secure that Parliament or the Cabinet shall in the long run give effect to the will of the people. These conventions are being disregarded today. and so by extension is the will of the nation. Parliament sets itself against the people. Sovereignty comes from the people to Parliament. It does not come to Parliament out of a void. If Parliament tries to challenge the people, this stretches the elastic of our Constitution near to breaking point. We should recognise that the people are our masters and show us to be their lieges and servants, not to place ourselves in the position of their overlords. As we come to vote today, I hope all members, Mr. Speaker, will contemplate the current constitutional confusion and consider the chaos this concatenation of circumstances could create.